Good evening from the monastery. The title of this broadcast, as you see on YouTube, I intended, I hope, to draw somebody's interest. Not to the exclusion of all others, no one excluded. It's become commonplace to use the phrase of Emperor Justinian the Great, that marriage consists in the union of one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others. And Justinian, of course, was trying to bring it into concubinage, polygamy, and men having mistresses. And we say marriage is the union of one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others. But there's something else that takes place between one man and one woman that doesn't exclude all others, and that's a divorce. Divorce is never just between two people because it affects all kinds of other people, particularly when there are children. It can have very serious and sometimes even devastating effects on children. Some children adjust fairly well, others don't. Others are scarred, but the scarring doesn't show until later when they attempt a marriage of their own. And also to parents-in-law, grandparents, siblings of the husband and the wife, and even many cases of parish. Divorce is really a tragedy. There are times when divorce is completely necessary. Anyone can think of those particular times. But often, a couple will get a civil divorce and then show up and tell they want to get remarried or something. Suddenly think that, we want to get remarried in the church, so we need a canonical divorce. So as a complete afterthought, you go to the, somehow contact the diocese and ask for a canonical divorce. There's something really wrong in people having developed that kind of a mentality. It really shows the impotence of our teaching and shows how marriage itself has become a colorful ritual. It's not really being taught properly or in any real depth. Even the meaning of the divine service is not really being taught to people. And when a couple come for marriage, it's a little late to start teaching them. We need to begin, at some degree anyway, of teaching children in the lowest grades of church schools about family and marriage and about what it actually means, and gradually work into teaching the meaning of the divine service itself and to teach how marriage is a kind of revelation of the mystery of redemption, of the mystery of Christ and the church. And that people would come first to the priest or the bishop about a divorce. It gives an opportunity for the priest or the hierarch to try to work out some way to save the marriage, to see if there isn't some possibility. Divorce has become almost as commonplace as marriage itself. And it's so easy to get a divorce. You can practically get a mail order divorce in our day, in a civil society. And even when a canonical divorce is given, basically all you have to do is send the fee to the diocese and they send back a canonical divorce. It really generally amounts to not a great deal more than that. The attempts to arbitrate to save a marriage really don't take place nearly enough. And so we can't say that divorce is not to the exclusion of all others. Divorce includes a lot of people. And the more children there are, the bigger the family, the bigger the extended family of the husband and the wife, the more people are somehow touched and involved in the pain and the tragedy of divorce. And perhaps what becomes even more sad is how many people do not even consider divorce to be a tragedy, but just sort of a natural event. And even have now divorce parties the same way that they had wedding parties. One thing it does show is the impotency of our influence in the lives of the faithful when this happens. We condemn abortion, every patriarchate, every diocese, every priest, I'm sure, and yet the three countries with the largest percentage of abortions in Europe today are three nominally Orthodox Christian countries: Romania, Greece, and Russia. This also demonstrates a kind of impotency. And one of the roots of it, in many cases, the relationship of the clergy with the faithful. The other thing is that when we teach people things that are patently untrue and insist they have to believe them, when we tell people, oh, you must believe this or that, and the people know that what you're telling them they have to believe is simply not the truth. And of course, the younger the generation, the more they're aware that many of the things they're being taught in church school, in religious education class in, say, Greece or someplace, you know, these things are simply not the truth. And once we've done that, they're not going to take us seriously about anything anymore, including the sanctity of marriage, the catastrophe of divorce, and the great, enormous, immeasurable tragedy of abortions. It's something that also occurred, for example, when, many of you know, when Ellen DeGeneres was hired to be a spokesperson for J.C. Penney's company down in America. And there were going to be 1 million mothers out boycotting J.C. Penney's. Well, they finally got around 40,000 members, and as somebody said, rounded it off to the nearest million upward. And of course, J.C. Penney simply shrugged and said, oh, big deal. And there isn't a boycott. Even among the 40,000 members, if J.C. Penney's has a huge spring sale, they're going to be in line like everybody else to shop at J.C. Penney's. Having made this enormous issue out of it, once more showed the impotency, the ultimate impotency of Christianity in America, and not just there. When the vote in Washington state came up for same-sex marriage, several corporations sponsored that and backed it. One of them was Starbucks. The other was, of course, Microsoft. Nobody was foolish enough to suggest that anybody would boycott Microsoft because you don't really have that many alternatives. But they did say that they were going to ruin Starbucks by having a boycott of Starbucks. Well, Starbucks wasn't the least bit concerned because most of the people who said they'd boycott it don't shop there and don't drink coffee there anyway. It didn't really make any difference because they were perfectly aware of the impotency of all of these movements, Christian movements. And one of the reasons for this impotency, of course, I already mentioned, teaching people things that they know very well are simply not the truth, and insisting that that's an integral dogma of the Christian faith, and that you can't be a Christian if you don't believe these things that are just simply not true. But within the Orthodox Church, I think the relationship, and particularly in Eastern Europe, but in North America, there's sufficient arrogance and cultism on the part of many of the priests and and a few hierarchs. But this division or separation, or this lack of warmth and closeness to the faithful within the church, and these antique ideas about, opening and closing royal gates and curtains during the liturgy, which really does cut the people out and make them sort of passive observers. And the more they're passive observers in a culture, in a society, and in an era, a century, when being active and being actively involved in things, even electronically, is so much a part of the culture and life, the more they're closed out this way, the less they're going to take it seriously. And they make up their own decisions about everything. Of course, you have some priests or cult leaders who want to brainwash or mentally control people, so they have some kind of special power, and they use confession to do it. And then, of course, people start not trusting confession either. But the remoteness and the arrogance and being cut out of the divine services in the way that the faithful are, in many cases, is a part of the loss of any kind of real influence in people's lives on the part of the clergy and ultimately the church itself. Of course, we have even very, very pious people, sincerely believing people, who'll get a civil divorce and then show up and say, okay, we got a civil divorce, but now I want to get remarried, so can I get a canonical divorce so I can get remarried in the church? So the canonical divorce means nothing more than that you can get remarried in the church. The whole tragedy of it is it doesn't really hit people, it doesn't really sink in. And that the breakup of a marriage is really the breakup of a society, the breakup of a culture. Divorce is the enemy of society and culture, and of the cohesion of society and culture. We look all over the place for other scapegoats, but the ease and simplicity with which people get a divorce, and the way they have only second or third thoughts about bringing it up and discussing it with the hierarchy or the priest in the church, is part of the tragedy for us as Orthodox Christians. And again, a part of it is this kind of remoteness that exists. And I realize some parishes, maybe even some whole dioceses, have overcome this thing that, well, the clergy are the aristocracy and the people are sort of out there, but we're going to close and open doors and curtains during the liturgy, and the people are not holy enough to see some parts of it, and whatever excuses are made up for. It means absolutely nothing, the doors and the curtain and the liturgy. If it depends on the rank of the priest, when he can open and close the doors and the curtains, it obviously has absolutely no meaning whatsoever, and we can cook up all kinds of symbolism for it if we want, but it doesn't wash. It just closes the people out, makes a bigger gap between the clergy and the faithful. And that, of course, limits the influence that the church can have on the faithful. And this then multiplies itself. I mean, the coldness and the arrogance of some of the hierarchy and clergy in, say, Romania and Russia and Serbia and Greece is not just a part of the symptom of the illness, but it's part of the virus itself that creates this lessening of the influence of the Orthodox faith on the Orthodox faithful. And where you see that people have overcome these sort of divisions, where the priests have a really warm and loving relationship with the parish, and where the people aren't involved in the liturgy, you see a completely different atmosphere. And it's joyous to visit a parish or church and see that. The other part of it is this insistence on teaching things that are patently untrue, and insisting that people have to believe these falsehoods in order to be good Christians. They know they're falsehoods, so they don't take it seriously about anything else either. And the fact that when we have a movement of some kind or a protest within the Christian community, and I'll say this particularly in North America, it usually has to do with hate. We condemn abortion. Let me ask how many of you Orthodox bishops and priests ever mention in your teaching, instruction, or sermons about the millions of unborn children, of already born children, who die every year from starvation or because their country's been invaded and bombed by some other country. And we pretend that all of these children are not being killed in these wars, when of course they are. But just to ask, how many of you ever mention this in your parishes? How many of you ever speak out about it? or speak out against it, or speak out in behalf of already born children who are suffering. And not just in third world countries. If you want to see the third world, go to Los Angeles, go to San Francisco, go to New York, go to Phoenix. And you'll see the third world in full tilt. You'll see families where the husband, and maybe the husband and wife both, are fully employed, but they cannot earn enough money to both feed their children and have a house. How many street people, how many families living in tents, someplace in a park, where the husband's fully employed, but can't earn enough money to pay rent and feed his family? How many of you have spoken out about that in the last 10 years in your parishes? How many bishops have brought this to the attention of people in their own dioceses? So you see, it's phony to condemn abortion and totally ignore the miserable, suffering, painful, horrible deaths of millions of already born children in this world. It doesn't balance. It doesn't wash. It's cellophane. You can see through it. You have to include both. When we make a division between the born and the unborn, we lessen the status of those who are not yet born, while we're trying to make them the cause célèbre, totally separating them from other children. We talk about the unborn, they're children. They're in the womb, they're developed, they're children. The already born are children. So what we need to be doing is defending children, period. No matter which side of the womb they're on. But it's totally ignored. And this also weakens and undermines the testimony of the church, the testimony of the clergy. It's focusing on one problem while having a completely contradictory attitude toward an equal problem, of equal suffering, of equal death, and putting together a protest only when it's about hating someone, instead of protesting the death of all these millions of people, instead of protesting the economics of fully employed people having to live on the street and breaking up their families because they can't earn enough money to both house them and feed and clothe them, so the families collapse and are broken up. That contributes to divorce, and it contributes to broken families as well. So this is something we need to focus on, is the gross hypocrisy that is making the Christian witness totally impotent in the world around us. Just want people to think about that prayerfully for a little bit. Thank you for listening, and God bless you all, and pray for the strength and structure of the family, that divorce won't be such an easy option. And also pray that God, our Lord Jesus Christ, and the grace of the Holy Spirit will illumine us to care about humanity. Born, unborn, never mind. They're all children. They're all equal. We should worry about one as equally as we worry about the other. So you say, well, 1 million children are aborted every year in, say, the United States. Fine. 10 million children starve to death every year in the Horn of Africa, in that whole segment of what we call the Sahel. Have you ever thought about them? Do you ever care about them? Do you even think about them at all? You see, this is hypocrisy. Focusing on the thing that we become sensually excited about, and it is a sensual excitement, of course it is. We become a passion for us. So much so that we forget and we create a paradox and a contradiction that cannot be resolved, and it cannot be resolved in the minds of educated young people, and they don't take the church seriously anymore. So think about that prayerfully, if you will. And again, thank you very much, and God bless you.